fast enough that I can actually give them to my girlfriend's dad to sell at his sporting goods store as bait. Now, it didn't start off that way, though. When I first decided to raise redworms for composting, I just jumped in without doing any sort of research. I bought 1,000 worms off of Amazon, believe it or not, and I bought an 18-gallon plastic bin, and I just sort of threw the worms in there. I threw a bunch of food in, and a little bit of soil and leaves and crap from outside, and I figured it would take care of itself. Well, that wasn't really the case. The worms weren't eating the scraps fast enough, so the entire environment kind of became stinky and gross, and the worms actually started dying off. The liquid would all pool at the bottom of the bin, and it started going up and up and up. And what I found was that some of the worms at the bottom were actually drowning. Now, it'll take a long time for worms to drown, but it does actually happen. So that first attempt didn't turn out so well at all. My second attempt solved the moisture problem, but it created a couple of others. I actually built like a 4-foot wide bin out of some scrap I had sitting around, and I designed it such that the bottom of the bin went at a slope. It sloped down about 2 degrees so that the water would hit the bottom and it would drain to one side, and then there were 2 pieces that came in at an angle that would actually direct the water straight to the center, and then it would drain out a little copper pipe that I installed. And that worked really well for the water, but unfortunately this bin didn't solve any of the other problems that I was having, and it actually created some other problems in that when the bin was full, I could barely move the thing. It was so cumbersome that it actually caused a lot of problems for me. Then on top of that, the lumber that I used, and I really should have known better, I used Douglas fir that I had sitting around, which isn't all of that water safe. I really should have built it out of cedar or something like that. But what happened over time was that the water made the wood warp, and pretty soon I didn't have a bin that was watertight anyway, so it was next to useless for what I was using it for. Now, it was at that point that I decided to do a little bit of research, and I purchased Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Appelhof. This book showed me pretty quickly where I was going wrong with the whole process. Basically, worms require a couple of things. They require food, and they require bedding, and they require moisture, and I wasn't giving them those 3 things in the right quantities for a healthy environment. On top of that, I read some information online that I think was somewhat inaccurate. It said that the worms would come to the top to feed, so I was just dumping my table scraps on top of the on the top of the worm bin, and yeah, they would come to the top to eat, but then again, so do fruit flies. And I was just attracting thousands and thousands of flies to my bin. Since I read the book, I learned that I should bury my scraps and I should cover it with a little bit of fresh bedding. And on top of that, I actually now cover the bin with a layer of damp cardboard too. And that serves 2 purposes. Number one, fruit flies will not dig around the cardboard and through that bedding to get to the food, so it eliminates the fruit fly problem. And in addition to that, worms don't like light, so keeping that cardboard on top, it keeps it dark, but they can still come up to feed, and that's really good. Now, one thing I liked about this book was that the author does take a little bit of time to talk about how to separate your worms from your worm castings when it comes time to do that. That was not information that I had a real easy time finding online, so that was another very beneficial part of this book. But one thing you're actually going to have to keep in mind while reading this book, which I certainly had to ignore, was that once in a while she gets a little bit over the top and sensational. There's a portion of the book where she talks about the type of pests that might get attracted to your worm bin and how to deal with them. And she doesn't recommend using a vacuum cleaner to suck up any fruit flies because she thinks using electricity to do any part of this process is counterintuitive to the whole idea. Well, you know, she's entitled to that opinion, but at the end of the day, I just wanted those freaking flies out of my house. So did I fire up the shop vac? You're freaking right, I did. Now, one thing, if you read this book and you go back and you look at my video, you're going to notice in a couple of minutes when I show you my worm bin that it's not actually a worm bin design that's directly from this book. It's actually an adaptation that I found online, and I'm going to provide a link for that. But basically what I did was I took 2 18-gallon plastic bins, and I took one of them and drilled holes in the bottom, and then I stuck it inside the other bin. And basically what you do is the inner bin gets filled with all your stuff, the worm bedding, the worms, your food, etc., etc., and you let the worms do their job. Well, once they've processed that stuff to your liking, what you're going to do is you're going to take that bin out. You're going to fill the outer bin sufficiently with bedding and food, and then put the other bin on top of it. And what you're going to find is that in a couple of weeks, the worms separate themselves. They get hungry because there's not enough food in the top bin, that they will actually migrate down through those holes into the other bin to get to the food. And then you don't have to do any of that stuff that she actually talks about in the book to separate the worms, because they've done the job for you. Now, if this is the kind of thing that interests you, I can't recommend Worms Eat My Garbage enough. It really is a great book. Science geeks are going to love this book because the author, Mary Appelhof, pictured here dressed a lot like Han Solo. She was a science teacher herself when she wrote this book, and she goes out of her way to use all of the proper terminology for the processes and the critters that she talks about in the book. But on the other hand, it's simple enough that just everyday recycling geeks like me can understand it and get what they need out of it without choking on complicated terminology. Well, now that I've talked about the book, why don't I go ahead and show you my worm bin? At least one of them. I have 3. All right. So this is one of my 3 bins, and as you can see on top, I've drilled out holes because one thing worms need is oxygen. And as you can see here, like I talked about, I've got one bin inside of another bin. And down here is another thing from the book. You can't see, it's on the other side. But I keep track of when I feed them and roughly where in the bin I put the food so I can stagger when and where I feed them. Inside the bin, the top layer is wet cardboard. That keeps the bulk of the flies out. You can see a couple flying around here probably, but it's very few compared to the problem I used to have. The next layer is sawdust, which is what I use for bedding. Worms love cellulose, so shredded paper and sawdust are some very good things to use. Here's some planer shavings. It's a wood product. Once again, it's real good for them. Let me see if I can dig through here and find some material and some worms. Here's an orange peel. Now they've eaten all the material from the inside of it. It looks like they're having a hard time with the peel. At some point I might take that out or grind it up and see if they can do some more work on it. Coffee, they like that stuff. What else do we got here? Oh, one thing you're definitely going to want to add to your worm bin, which is actually talked about in the book, is calcium. Stuff like eggshells, and I actually added some shrimp shells a couple of weeks ago. Calcium is what really supposedly gets the reproductive process going with worms. I added some shrimp shells in from a shrimp fry we had weeks ago, and it wasn't that long after that I started seeing babies and I started seeing eggs. You got to look close for them, but you can definitely see them. There's a healthy looking worm. Now, I don't know how well my camera's going to pick this up, but right here where my finger is pointing, that is an egg. So when you're separating out your worm castings from your worms, keep a lookout for them and save them so you're not disposing of perfectly good baby worms. Alright, well that's basically all I have to show you guys about Worms Eat My Garbage and my vermicomposting process. I really hope you buy the book. It really taught me a lot, and I'm really happy with the way this whole process works and the fact that not only do they recycle my kitchen scraps for me, but it creates good compost for my plants, and I've got a couple of worms left over that I can give to my girlfriend's dad to sell at his shop. The whole process is just awesome as far as I'm concerned. So I hope you give it a shot. I will catch you later.